In a small cafe on a freezing winter day, Alexander Blake, a hardened millionaire with a cold, calculating gaze, proposed an unexpected deal.
My fiancée for Christmas.
Sophia Grant, an artist burdened with mounting debt, agreed not out of belief in fairy tales, but because she needed the money to survive. As the days passed, however, something changed. The compassion that grew between them began to crack the walls of their fake relationship, and the line between pretense and reality blurred. Could a millionaire's request for a holiday charade lead to real love? Or was it just a fleeting performance bound to end with the season? What happens next could change everything. A winter afternoon in downtown New York. Snow fell gently, soft white flakes settling on the large glass windows, forming a misty curtain that veiled the hurried crowds shuffling along the sidewalk. Inside a small cafe tucked into the corner of the street, the atmosphere was entirely different, warm, quiet, and familiar, like a tender embrace shielding the lost from the cold outside. The dim golden light poured down from vintage pendant lamps, glinting off the aged dark wooden floors. Small wooden tables and chairs were neatly arranged, each holding a steaming white porcelain cup. Hands intertwined around the warmth of their coffee, while a few patrons sat in the corners, murmuring in hushed tones that melted into the soft hum of Christmas music, the familiar melody of
"Have yourself a merry little Christmas,"
played, soothing and gentle like a long, comforting sigh. Near the window sat Alexander Blake, his posture rigid against the leather-bound chair. He was tall, striking in a finely tailored black suit and crisp white shirt. A silver watch gleamed faintly on his wrist, catching the light, though it paled in comparison to the expression on his face. His sharp features were tense, brows drawn together in a clear display of strain. His deep-set eyes, shadowed and intense, stared unblinkingly at the phone screen before him. Messages appeared one after another, their familiar tone cutting deeper with every word: pressure, blame, and demands.
"You need to bring her home. I don't want to hear another excuse."
Alexander exhaled softly, a heavy breath that spoke of exhaustion. Leaning forward, he rested his elbow on the table, slender fingers tapping absently against the side of his untouched espresso. Despite the warmth and quiet beauty of his surroundings, Alexander seemed like a streak of black ink disrupting an otherwise colorful painting. The gentle chime of the cafe door broke the silence. A gust of cold air swept in, crawling along the floor and causing a few patrons to pull their coats tighter. The door closed, and the quiet rhythm of the cafe resumed. Sophia Grant entered, her presence a stark contrast to Alexander's. She was small, nearly swallowed by an old gray coat frayed at the sleeves. A red knit hat was pulled low over her forehead, concealing most of her unruly brown hair, stray strands clinging to her flushed cheeks. Beads of sweat dotted her brow, as if she had run a long way. In her arms, she cradled a large bundle of art sketches, haphazardly bound with twine. The edges of the white sheets peeked out, some curling from the damp touch of snow. She hesitated by the entrance, scanning the cafe with a look of quiet worry. Her bright brown eyes seemed to search for something, a seat, a breath of warmth, or perhaps a fleeting sense of peace. She approached the counter, her voice soft, hands carefully placing the sketches down, as though any sudden movement might damage them. The barista gently.
"What can I get you?"
Sophia glancing into her bag, then looking up.
"A black coffee. The cheapest one, please. Thank you."
She pulled a few crumpled bills from an old wallet and placed them on the counter before wrapping her fingers around the hot cup. Her hands lingered there, absorbing as much warmth as they could. Balancing the bundle of sketches under one arm, she moved deeper into the cafe, searching for an empty spot. A few patrons glanced at her, their expressions a mix of curiosity and pity, but Sophia paid them no mind. The faint creak of her small boots echoed softly against the wooden floor as she walked past the tables. Her eyes brushed over the table near the window where Alexander sat. She hesitated for just a moment before continuing on, choosing instead a quieter corner away from prying eyes. Even a fleeting glance from Alexander, sharp and fleeting, was enough to make her feel as though she had trespassed into a space where she did not belong. Sophia placed her sketches down, pulled off her knit hat, and exhaled a long breath. She took a small sip of the black coffee. Its bitterness was sharp, but it grounded her, chasing away the fog of fatigue. For now, in the warmth of the cafe and the gentle hum of Christmas music, she could forget the chaos of unpaid bills stacked high on her kitchen table. At the same moment, Alexander's gaze flicked toward her once more. He didn't linger, but the contrast between the small woman in her threadbare coat and his own image, polished, cold, yet burdened, stirred something inexplicable within him. A fleeting feeling, like a ripple in still water, as though their two worlds, impossibly distant, had collided for just this moment. The music shifted to
Silent Night.
its soft notes settling over the cafe like a delicate hush. Outside the window, the snow continued to fall, slow and serene, painting a picture of tranquil yet lonely winter. And in this small cafe, two souls, one crushed under the weight of family expectation, the other pushed by life's relentless demands, had yet to realize that fate had just begun to weave their story together. Alexander sat near the window, his posture perfectly straight, dressed in an impeccably tailored black suit. The espresso cup on the table still steamed faintly. His eyes, silent yet razor-sharp, were fixed on the phone screen in front of him. The cafe door opened with a soft chime, and a gust of cold air swept through the room. Sophia hurried inside, her old gray coat hugging her small frame, cheeks flushed crimson from the chill. In her arms, she clutched a large stack of drawings, the edges crumpled and dampened by the snow. Her gaze darted nervously around the cafe as she tugged at a long, tangled scarf that kept snagging her hand. As she passed Alexander's table, her foot caught the edge of a small suitcase resting near his chair. The impact sent her stack of drawings sliding from her arms, the sheets scattering across the wooden floor. The sudden jolt caused Alexander's espresso cup to tremble, spilling a few dark drops onto his expensive coat. Alexander's brow furrowed sharply as his cold, knife-like gaze lifted. Startled, Sophia froze, staring at the mess of drawings on the floor before immediately crouching to gather them. Her hands trembled slightly, her eyes filled with embarrassment and panic. Sophia frantic.
Oh my God. I'm so sorry. I wasn't looking. I didn't mean to. Please,
Alexander's gaze flickered down to his coat, where dark coffee stains were spreading slowly across the fine black fabric. He let out a slow, sharp breath, his expression etched with irritation. Alexander coldly.
Do you have any idea how much this coat cost?
Sophia froze mid-motion, looking up at him. Her face turned a deeper shade of red, this time from shame, but there was a flicker of defiance in her eyes. In the cozy, warm cafe, his voice cut through her like a cold gust of wind. Sophia sarcastic, biting.
Well, then just send me the bill. I'll pay you with this.
She leaned slightly to one side, pulling a drawing from her crumpled stack and holding it up to him. It was a simple winter scene, a small wooden cabin nestled in a snowy forest, golden light spilling warmly from its windows. The image stood in stark contrast to the icy demeanor of the man before her. For a brief moment, Alexander's expression faltered, his eyes flicking to the artwork and back to her resolute face. Alexander mocking, a hint of a smirk.
That drawing wouldn't even come close to covering it, Miss Artist.
Sophia yanked the drawing back, quickly tucking it into the stack and clutching the papers tightly to her chest. Her breathing hitched slightly, but she lifted her chin, refusing to back down. Sophia firm, unyielding.
Well, I'm sorry, Mr. Fancy Suit, but I didn't bring a credit card to pay for your $1,000 gold.
Alexander watched her as she straightened, her brown eyes holding a defiant fire he hadn't expected. She hastily gathered the remaining drawings, her movements sharp and precise, before turning on her heel and walking toward an empty table. Her back remained straight, her steps deliberate, but the way she held the stack of papers against her chest was telling, like a shield protecting her from the world. Alexander sat motionless, his narrowed eyes following her retreating figure. Something about her answer lingered in his mind, not the chaos she had caused, but the quiet strength in her voice and the way she refused to bow under his judgment. The soft hum of Christmas music still played, but the peaceful atmosphere of the cafe had been disrupted. Alexander slowly lifted what remained of his espresso and took a sip, his lips curling faintly into a smirk that was impossible to decipher. The cafe returned to its quiet calm, but Alexander's gaze lingered on Sophia. She crouched down, carefully gathering the scattered drawings, smoothing the edges of each sheet with delicate fingers. A crumpled overdue rent notice slipped from her coat pocket, fluttering to the floor. Alexander's sharp eyes caught the large sum printed on the paper, but Sophia remained oblivious, too focused on her task, cheeks still flushed from the cold. Leaning back in his chair, Alexander studied the small figure before him, her old coat, the bundle of drawings clutched to her chest, as though they were the most precious thing she owned. His voice broke the silence, low and cutting through the stillness. "Alexander,
Are you having trouble?"
Sophia startled, jerking her head up to face him, her expression wary. Sophia frowning, with a faint, bitter smile.
"Is this about the coat again?"
Alexander held her gaze for a moment, his face unreadable, before replying evenly, "Alexander,
"I have a proposition. It has nothing to do with the coat."
Sophia's grip on the drawings tightened, her shoulders lifting defensively. "Sophia."
"What kind of proposition? This doesn't sound promising."
Alexander leaned forward slightly, his sharp gaze softening just enough to betray a glimmer of something warmer, something almost imperceptible. "Alexander."
"Sit down. I'll tell you."
Sophia hesitated, glancing around as if searching for an escape. But his unwavering gaze held her in place, leaving her no room to flee. With visible reluctance, she pulled out the chair opposite him and sat down, her arms folded tightly across her chest in challenge. Sophia coolly.
"Well, go on then, but don't make this weird."
Alexander studied her, his voice calm and deliberate. Every word weighted. "Alexander."
"I need a fiancé."
Sophia froze, her eyes widening in disbelief. "Sophia."
"I'm sorry. What?"
"Alexander."
"A fake one. I need you to pretend to be my fiancé for a few days."
She stared at him, stunned, her expression shifting from shock to suspicion. "Sophia."
"You're serious?"
Alexander steadily.
"If you agree, I'll pay you enough to handle whatever trouble you're in."
Sophia's lips pressed into a thin line as she scrutinized him, her mind racing with unspoken questions. Outside, the snow continued to fall, the soft jingle of the cafe's door chime echoing faintly, as though heralding the turning point in Sophia's life. Sophia remained seated, her wide brown eyes fixed on Alexander, as if he had just uttered the most absurd thing she'd ever heard. For a brief moment, her breath hitched, but then a smirk crept onto her lips, dripping with sarcasm. Sophia shrugging, mockingly.
"So you, this perfect, cold, and self-assured man, actually need to hire someone to play your fiancé. That's more illogical than one of my abstract paintings."
Alexander didn't flinch at her jab. He sat there, still as stone, his cold, sharp gaze unwavering, quietly observing every flicker of expression on her face. Alexander, calm, measured.
"Believe it or not, that's up to you. But the situation stands. I need someone to bring home for Christmas, and I think you'd play the part well."
Sophia crossed her arms, leaning back in the chair, skepticism still clouding her face. "Sophia."
"Well, you don't even know who I am. And for the record, I'm not interested in getting tangled up in whatever weird theater this is."
Alexander leaned forward slightly, his gaze growing sharper, more serious, so serious it made Sophia's smirk falter. "Alexander."
"You need money. I saw the overdue notice fall out of your pocket. Don't take it personally. I'm simply offering you a transaction.
Sophia froze. Her hands unconsciously tightened around the stack of drawings on her lap, her face heating from a mixture of shame and anger. Sophia quiet, her voice hardening.
I don't need your pity.
Alexander cutting in, his voice firm.
This isn't pity, Sophia. It's business. I need someone to act as my perfect fiancé for a few days. In return, I'll pay you enough to solve your problems.
She laughed bitterly, shaking her head in disbelief. Sophia.
Perfect fiancé? You've picked the wrong person. I don't know how to fake a smile or charm anyone with sweet little lies.
Alexander raised an eyebrow, his lips curling into the faintest hint of a smirk, one that was almost challenging. Alexander.
You don't need to fake it. I just need you to be convincing. You spilled coffee on me and had the audacity to mock me. Trust me, my family will believe you're nothing like the women they've met before.
Sophia was silent. What he said wasn't exactly a compliment, but it wasn't an insult either. She stared at him for a long moment, searching for something in his deep, impenetrable eyes. But all she found was a wall, calm, unyielding. Sophia hesitant.
Why me? This is New York. You could find dozens of women who are prettier, smoother, and far less trouble than me.
Alexander leaned back in his chair, his sharp gaze softening ever so slightly into something more contemplative. Alexander quiet, yet resolute.
Because you're not like them, and I don't have time to search for anyone else. You need money, and I need a solution. We both have a goal.
Sophia stared at him, her lips parting as if to speak, but no words came. The soft strains of
Silent Night
began to play again, the melody weaving through the quiet space, heavy and lingering. She looked down at the stack of drawings in her arms, then out the window, where snow continued to fall steadily. Thoughts collided within her. This was insane. Utterly insane. But then, she thought of the overdue rent notice, the looming eviction, and the unfinished dream she couldn't bear to abandon. The choice wasn't easy, but it was clear. Sophia lifted her head, her brown eyes locking with Alexander's, now filled with reluctant determination. Sophia sighing, resigned.
If I agree, you'll pay me half up front. And you can't drag me into any messes outside your little
Alexander inclined his head, his lips curling into a faint smile, one that was almost satisfied. Alexander.
Deal.
Sophia took a deep breath, as though bracing herself to leap off a cliff with no idea what lay below. Slowly, she extended her hand toward him, palm open, the gesture both hesitant and final. Sophia muttering.
I can't believe I'm doing this.
Alexander grasped her hand firmly, his grip steady and resolute. Alexander.
Then as of now, we have an agreement.
As their hands parted, Sophia looked at him, still unsure whether she'd made the right choice. But somewhere deep inside her, so small it was almost a whisper, a voice murmured.
Your life is about to change.
Outside, the faint jingle of the door's wind chime rang again as another customer entered. Snow continued to fall, blanketing the city of New York in a cold, unbroken white, while inside the small cafe, a strange pact had been sealed, a pact that would alter everything. The cafe returned to its quiet stillness. Sophia bent down to gather her scattered drawings, her hands trembling slightly. An overdue rent notice slipped from her stack, landing softly on the wooden floor. Alexander's brow furrowed as his sharp gaze caught the large number printed on it. Sophia, unaware, silently collected her papers and stood up, her cheeks flushed crimson from the cold. Alexander's voice broke the silence, low and steady.
Are you in trouble?
Sophia looked up sharply, her lips curling into a faint, sardonic smile, though her eyes held a wary edge.
That sounds like the devil offering a deal.
He remained unruffled, his tone calm, almost casual.
I need a fiancé just for a few days.
Sophia froze, blinking at him as if waiting for the punchline of some joke. When it didn't come, she let out a soft, disbelieving laugh, laced with mockery.
You're serious? What is this? Some kind of game?
Alexander's gaze didn't waver, his expression unwaveringly firm.
I'll pay you enough to handle whatever trouble you're in.
Sophia held his stare, her brown eyes searching his face as though trying to decipher hidden motives. The silence stretched between them, heavy and unrelenting. Finally, she exhaled, her shoulders sinking slightly as if the fight had drained from her.
Things fine,
she muttered, her voice tinged with resignation.
I'll play the part.
Alexander nodded, satisfaction flickering briefly across his features. He said nothing more as he watched her turn and walk away, the stack of drawings clutched tightly to her chest, like a fragile shield against the world. Outside, the snow-laden wind lashed against Sophia's face, making her shiver involuntarily. She walked slowly down the snow-covered sidewalk, her steps deliberate, her breath misting in the cold air. A faint smile tugged at her lips, a smile of quiet resignation, with the faintest trace of curiosity. Snowflakes settled onto her dark hair, and her small figure gradually disappeared into the swirling veil of white. Inside the cafe, Alexander remained seated, his gaze distant as it lingered on the frost-covered window. The low hum of Christmas music reverberated softly through the air, mingling with the heavy weight of his thoughts.
I'll play the part.
Her words echoed in his mind, haunting in their simplicity. Did she truly understand what she was stepping into? Did he? Could he keep his emotions contained within the bounds of a mere transaction? With a decisive motion, Alexander stood, pulling on his coat with practiced precision. His movements were sharp, deliberate. It had begun. And starting tomorrow, Sophia Grant would step into his world, a world of grandeur, yes, but also one steeped in cold calculation and hidden truths. The next morning, pale sunlight filtered through the large windows of Alexander's apartment. The living room was vast and refined but cold, devoid of the warmth that made a house a home. On a long wooden table sat a neatly arranged stack of folders and a detailed schedule, ready for the training session ahead. Alexander stood before the table, arms crossed, his sharp gaze unyielding. The doorbell rang. He glanced at his watch before striding over to open the door. Sophia stood there, her cheeks flushed pink from the cold, but her brown eyes held their familiar defiance. Alexander coolly.
You're punctual. Come in.
Sophia took a deep breath and stepped inside the luxurious yet hollow apartment. The space was eerily silent, the polished wooden floors gleaming beneath the cold light of the crystal chandelier. A charcoal gray sofa, an unlit fireplace, and perfectly aligned bookshelves created an atmosphere of calculated perfection. Abstract paintings hung symmetrically on the walls, as though the entire room were a curated display rather than a lived-in space. Removing her knit hat, Sophia glanced around, murmuring under her breath.
Wow, doesn't exactly look like someone lives here?
Alexander didn't respond, his lips curving faintly into a humorless smirk. Crossing his arms, he stood there, waiting for her to collect herself. Alexander low, steady.
We have a lot to cover.
Sophia pulled out a chair, dropping her bag to the floor as she continued to survey the space. Sophia dryly.
You live alone. I'd expect someone like you to have a small army of housekeepers.
Alexander curtly.
I prefer silence.
Sophia shrugged, her gaze settling on the empty fireplace. She muttered under her breath.
Silence or emptiness?
For a brief moment, Alexander faltered, something flickering in his eyes before his composure returned. He pulled the stack of folders closer, flipping them open with crisp precision, his voice firm and unyielding.
If you're going to play this role well, you'll need to quit the witty commentary and focus on the task at hand.
Leaning back in the chair, Sophia arched a brow in challenge but said nothing. The room fell silent again, save for the faint whistle of wind against the window and the soft rustling of papers. The apartment remained as flawless and solitary as before, but Sophia's presence felt like a small, unexpected crack of light piercing through the cold, calculated stillness. Sophia lounged on the gray velvet sofa as if Alexander's pristine apartment were her own. Her worn coat lay over the armrest, revealing a simple sweater. Holding a glass of wine taken from the nearby bar, she casually flipped through the file on the table, a smirk tugging at her lips. Sophia mocking.
So, we met at a charity gala. I saved you from a clingy woman, and we fell in love. Hilarious.
She glanced at Alexander, her sarcasm clear. Alexander stood across from her, arms folded, his black suit impeccable. Alexander coolly.
Memorize everything. My mother can't suspect anything.
Sophia shrugged, sipping her wine. Sophia dryly.
Relax, boss. I've got this. Saving you from a clingy woman? Highlight of your life, right?
Ignoring her jab, Alexander sat across from her. Alexander serious.
This isn't a joke. My family will spot insincerity.
Sophia swirled her wine, eyeing him. Sophia challenging.
Why me? A broke artist who doesn't fit your world.
Alexander calmly.
Because you're not like them.
His words, simple and direct, caught her off guard. Their gazes locked briefly before she broke the tension with a laugh. Sophia teasing.
Fine. Charity Gala loves reading, adores Margaret Blake. Sounds perfect?
Alexander slid the file closer. Alexander firmly.
Take this seriously. My family isn't simple.
Her playful demeanor softened. Realizing the complexity of the situation, she set her wine glass down, looking at the file. Sophia quietly.
All right, but I'm no actress.
Alexander low, steady.
Just play your part.
The air grew heavier as Sophia scanned the pages detailing her new life. Alexander stood by the window, pale winter light spilling into the room. Outside, the city moved in rhythm, snow falling softly. Inside, their pact, far more challenging than expected, was taking shape. Sophia sank deeper into the plush gray velvet sofa, her legs still casually crossed, the thick folder Alexander had given her resting idly in her lap. She flipped through its pages with exaggerated disinterest, her lips curving into a teasing smirk. Sophia mocking, a glint in her eyes.
Really? Your favorite color? Morning habits? The name of your childhood dog? Is this a rehearsal or an intelligence briefing, Mr. Alexander Blake?
Her voice dragged out the end of his name, deliberate and laced with sarcasm. She looked up at him, her expression playful, her tone daring, almost as if she was testing just how far she could push him. Alexander stood tall across from her, unwavering, his posture so precise it might have been carved from stone. His crisp white shirt hugged his broad shoulders perfectly, the very image of control and composure. He regarded her for a long moment, his sharp gaze steady and inscrutable. Finally, he exhaled softly, as if restraining himself. Alexander cold, with a touch of exasperation.
If you fail, I lose credibility with my family, and you lose your payment. It's that simple.
Sophia blinked, momentarily thrown off by the weight in his words. Her fingers traced the edge of the file absent-mindedly, the teasing smile on her lips softening, though her eyes still held their spark of challenge. Sophia lowering her voice, still playful.
Such a gentle threat. Do you treat all your partners this way?
Alexander didn't answer, his dark gaze fixed on her, unwavering, patient, waiting to see just how serious she could get. The silence between them stretched, filled only by the rhythmic ticking of the antique clock on the far wall. Finally, Sophia sighed, lifting her hands in defeat. She placed her wine glass on the table with a firm clink and met his gaze, her expression shifting to something more resolute. Sophia with mock surrender.
All right, test me then. Ask me anything from your precious list.
A flicker of surprise crossed Alexander's face, though he masked it quickly. He pulled out the chair opposite her, sitting down with measured precision. Opening the file in front of him, he looked at her, his voice steady and uncompromising. "Alexander."
"What's my name?"
Sophia immediate, with a shrug.
"Alexander Blake. Successful businessman, addicted to black coffee, and a schedule so precise it could rival a Swiss watch."
"Alexander."
"Where did we meet?"
Sophia deadpan, as if reciting.
"A charity gala 3 years ago. I rescued you from some clingy woman and you fell head over heels at first sight. Completely unrealistic, but I'll play along."
Alexander's brow arched faintly at her embellishment, but he didn't comment. Alexander serious, pressing forward.
"What's my mother's name? And what does she despise most?"
Sophia straightened slightly, her playful edge fading as she answered with surprising precision. "Sophia."
"Margaret Blake, a traditional, exacting woman who values perfection above all else. She despises dishonesty and anyone who disrespects family."
Alexander studied her in silence, his sharp gaze tracking every shift in her expression. She had answered flawlessly, but he wasn't simply listening to her words, he was testing her ability to embody the story. Sophia reclined again, her confidence returning as she quirked an eyebrow at him. Sophia smirking.
"Well, do I pass the preliminary round, boss?"
Alexander didn't answer immediately. His expression was as calm and unreadable as ever, but there was the faintest twitch at the corner of his mouth, a subtle concession to her effort. Alexander evenly.
"There's still work to do, but it'll do for now."
Sophia lifted the wine glass again, swirling its contents with a sly smile. Sophia light, teasing.
"You know, Alexander, I'm starting to think I might actually be good at this role."
Alexander's gaze lingered on her, deep and unreadable, as if he was silently turning over a thought he chose not to share. The room was steeped in silence, the cup of coffee on the table long gone cold amid their peculiar rehearsal. Alexander pulled the folder closer, his sharp gaze unwavering. "Alexander."
"Let's begin. What are your hobbies?"
Sophia lounged deeper into the sofa, one brow arched, her tone teasing. "Sophia."
"Painting, reading, and rescuing certain men from charity galas."
Alexander shot her a warning look, the faintest twitch at the corner of his mouth betraying him before he pressed on. "Alexander."
"Where did we meet?"
"Sophia."
"At a gala 3 years ago. Some woman latched onto you, and I was the heroic savior. Heartwarming, isn't it?"
A rare, fleeting smile escaped him, soft and unguarded, but it vanished almost instantly, replaced once again by his composed demeanor. "Alexander."
"What's my daily routine?"
Sophia straightened and imitated his matter-of-fact tone with mock precision. "Sophia."
"Up at 6, black coffee, financial news gem, then work. The thrilling life of a very bull—"
Alexander sighed, shaking his head in faint exasperation. "Alexander."
"You really have a way of being insufferable."
"Sophia."
"And yet you hired me for being the world's worst actress, remember?"
Alexander was about to end the session when Sophia's voice cut through the air, softer but probing. "Sophia."
"Why me? You could have chosen anyone else."
Alexander froze mid-motion, his hand gripping the edge of the table as if steadying himself. "Alexander."
"They weren't real."
Sophia frowned, studying him with newfound curiosity. "Sophia."
"And I am?"
Alexander met her gaze, his voice deliberate, slow, and for the first time, unmistakably honest. "Alexander."
"At least you're not pretending to care about me."
The room fell still again. Sophia's teasing smile faltered, giving way to something quieter, something thoughtful. For a moment neither of them spoke, and in that fragile silence, something unspoken seemed to stir, an emotion too elusive to name. Sophia let out a soft laugh, her voice gentler now, the edge of sarcasm fading. "Sophia."
That answer almost makes me feel special.
Alexander didn't reply. Instead, he turned toward the bar to pour himself a glass of water, his movements deliberate, as if needing the distraction. His gaze flickered back toward her, this small, stubborn woman who somehow radiated both fragility and unrelenting strength, and for reasons he couldn't quite explain, he found it hard to look away. The room grew quiet again, but it wasn't the same cold stillness as before. Sophia sat on the gray sofa, her brown eyes on Alexander by the table. His words lingered.
At least you're not pretending to care about me.
Her teasing demeanor had faded. Was it a compliment or a bitter truth? She couldn't tell. Sophia watched him, searching for cracks in his steely mask, but found only the impenetrable wall he always wore. Alexander stood briskly, pulling his black coat over his shoulders. His gaze briefly flicked to Sophia before hardening again. Alexander firmly.
Tomorrow, Vermont, play your part, and it'll be over.
The words hung sharp and final, a reminder of the boundaries they'd set. Sophia arched a brow but stayed silent, watching him walk to the door. His measured footsteps echoed on the polished floor before the door clicked shut, leaving a heavier silence behind. Sophia stared at the empty space, then reached for her wine glass. The deep red shimmered faintly in the chandelier's glow. She sipped slowly, the bitterness lingering. Sophia to herself.
What have I gotten myself into?
The question hung unanswered as she leaned back, her gaze shifting to the window. Snow swirled outside, silent and unrelenting, mirroring her inner turmoil. Was it unease, curiosity, or something else pulling her thoughts back to Alexander? She didn't know and wasn't ready to find out. The city lights blinked in the distance, but the apartment, pristine in its luxury, felt untouched and empty. Her shadow stretched long across the polished floor, a lonely mark on Alexander Blake's flawless canvas. The Manhattan sky darkened as city lights flickered. Sophia sat alone in Alexander's room, her thoughts drifting to Vermont, the Blake estate, and the challenging role ahead. The black SUV glided along a snowy road flanked by pine trees adorned with golden lights, as if leading to another world. Sophia, staring out the window, felt the cold wind slip through, carrying the scent of pine and stirring her anticipation. In the distance, the Blake estate appeared, domes capped in snow, golden light spilling from grand windows, and smoke rising faintly from chimneys. Christmas wreaths and angel statues framed the entrance, blending beauty with detachment. Sophia gripped her bag tightly, inhaling deeply, and turned to Alexander. Sophia sarcastic.
Like something out of Snow White.
Alexander calmly.
Welcome to my world. Don't let it fool you.
The SUV stopped at the gate. Sophia straightened, her heart pounding.
Here we go,
she thought. Stepping out, the biting wind reddened her cheeks. The mansion loomed, golden lights cutting through the falling snow. It was enchanting yet distant. Sophia softly.
It's beautiful, like a dream.
Alexander, silent, strode to the door as it opened. Sophia followed, leaving hesitant footprints in the snow. Inside, warm air carried the scent of gingerbread and cinnamon. Laughter echoed faintly. Standing amidst the glow, Sophia's heart raced as she realized she had stepped into a world where everything was unpredictable, poised on the edge of the unknown. The SUV came to a stop in front of the Blake estate, warm golden light spilling out from within, casting soft streaks across the snow-covered ground. Christmas wreaths and shimmering tinsel framed the massive wooden door. Alexander stepped out, adjusting his coat before opening the door for Sophia. Alexander.
Get out?
Sophia hesitated, pulling her coat tight as the icy wind rushed in. Her boots sank lightly into the snow as she stepped down, her eyes widening with awe at the sight of the mansion. Sophia softly.
My God, it's bigger than I imagined.
Alexander flatly.
It's just a house. Come on, they're waiting.
Clutching the strap of her bag, Sophia followed Alexander up the steps. The door swung open, and a wave of warmth swept over her, chasing away the cold. Inside, she was overwhelmed by the grandeur of the entrance hall, soaring ceilings, a glistening crystal chandelier, and a long red carpet stretching before her. The air was thick with the rich scents of gingerbread, cinnamon, and burning wood. At the center of the hall stood Margaret Blake, tall, commanding, wrapped in a deep green dress and a white fur coat. Her sharp eyes swept over Sophia with cool precision. Margaret.
Alexander, is this the guest you mentioned?
Alexander steadily.
Yes, this is Sophia, my fiancée.
Sophia froze for just a moment, but quickly composed herself. Sophia.
It's a pleasure to meet you, Mrs. Blake.
Margaret coldly.
Call me Margaret. I trust my son has explained what's expected of you to fit into this family.
Sophia calmly.
Yes, I'm prepared.
Margaret gave a curt nod before turning away. Margaret.
Good. Come in. I don't like dinner being late.
Sophia took a deep breath, her back straight as she followed Margaret inside. The chandelier's light reflected off the red carpet, illuminating every deliberate step she took. In the midst of such opulence, she couldn't shake the feeling of being out of place, an outsider struggling to blend into the Blake family's unforgiving world. Alexander softly.
Stay calm. You're doing great.
Sophia with a faint smirk.
I always do well in my roles.
Sophia's footsteps echoed against the marble floor as she followed Margaret. The red carpet stretched out before her, leading to something unknowable. The gilded mirrors and antique paintings lining the walls lent an air of grandeur, yet it felt suffocating, as though each step she took was being scrutinized. Suddenly, a voice rang out from the upstairs hallway. Elliot casually teasing.
So this is my cousin's secret fiancé. More interesting than I expected.
Sophia froze, looking up to see Elliot, Alexander's younger cousin, leaning lazily against the railing. His posture was relaxed, but his gaze carried an unmistakable edge of appraisal. Pressing her lips together, she glanced at Alexander, who had stopped as well, a flicker of irritation in his eyes. Alexander coolly.
Elliot, this isn't the time for jokes.
Elliot shrugging, with a faint smile.
Just welcoming the special guest, that's all.
Margaret halted, her sharp gaze slicing through the air and landing on Elliot. Margaret evenly, but with authority.
If you have nothing better to do, get ready for dinner.
Elliot lifted his hands in mock surrender, his voice light but layered with meaning. Elliot softly.
Of course, but I do look forward to hearing the story behind this.
Margaret resumed walking, but before entering the drawing room, she turned back to Sophia. Margaret.
Dinner starts in an hour. I trust you know how to make yourself fit in.
Sophia calmly, with a small nod.
Yes, I'll do my best.
As Elliot descended the staircase, he passed Sophia, his lips curling into a half smile. Elliot low, with an edge of mockery.
Good luck, Alexander's fiancé.
Sophia watched him go, her eyes narrowing with quiet resolve. Alexander softly, reassuring.
Ignore him. Elliot likes testing people.
Sophia turned to Alexander, a defiant smile tugging at her lips. Sophia.
I'm used to it, but thanks for the warning, cousin.
Surprise flickered across Alexander's face, but he said nothing, only smirking faintly before gesturing for her to enter the drawing room. Sophia took a deep breath and stepped forward. The mansion was a masterpiece of opulence and pressure, but she refused to let anyone here make her feel small. Sophia stood frozen in the grand hall, her feet rooted to the cold marble. The crystal chandelier above glinted like a galaxy, its light reflecting the mansion's suffocating perfection. White marble columns soared imposingly, as if to dwarf anything insignificant beneath them. Lost in thought, she blinked, the grandeur spinning around her. The mansion's beauty felt cold, much like its owner. Suddenly Alexander appeared, his hand firm on her shoulder, a gesture both grounding and cautionary. Alexander low, firm.
They'll be tough. We just need to get through Christmas, understand?
Sophia looked up, unease flickering in her eyes. His words were a warning, sharp and weighted. She nodded faintly, forcing a thin smile despite the growing dread within. Sophia softly.
I'm not easy to defeat.
Alexander studied her briefly, his gaze searching. Then, without a word, he walked toward the grand dining room doors, his figure a silent shield. Alone, Sophia exhaled deeply, the hollow emptiness pressing in around her. Sophia whispering,
What have I walked into?
Her gaze drifted to the chandelier above, its glow reflecting the quiet storm in her eyes, curiosity, unease, and a flicker of resolve. Tightening her grip on her bag, she vowed silently no turning back. Pushing open the grand doors, Sophia stepped into a space utterly different. The ballroom gleamed with polished wood and golden light. Classical music floated softly, mingling with polite chatter. Round tables adorned with fresh flowers and candles added to the air of suffocating opulence. Sophia paused, the weight of the room bearing down. She felt out of place, like a misplaced brushstroke on a perfect painting. Alexander appeared at her side, his hand resting lightly on her elbow, his touch polite yet directive. Alexander low.
Calm down, it's just a party.
Sophia turned, her unease laced with defiance. Sophia dryly.
Easy for you. I feel like I walked into the wrong audition.
Alexander arched a brow but said nothing, guiding her forward. Eyes immediately turned to them, whispers blending curiosity with quiet judgment. Across the room, Margaret's sharp gaze found them instantly, her expression unreadable but pointed. Sophia steadied herself, forcing a composed smile as she moved under the ballroom's golden glow. One question echoed faintly within.
What am I really doing here?
Unbeknownst to her, Alexander's gaze lingered longer than intended, quiet curiosity taking root. The party had begun, and for Sophia, this was no longer just a role, it was the first true test in Alexander Blake's exacting world. The grand ballroom glowed beneath the immense crystal chandelier, its golden light spilling onto the polished wooden floors. Round tables draped in pristine white linens dotted the room, accented by delicate vases of white roses and flickering candles. The atmosphere was both warm and cold, orchestrated to a level of perfection that felt stifling. Guests in exquisite attire exchanged polite smiles, their sharp eyes subtly assessing everything and everyone around them. The soft strains of classical music floated through the air, but to Sophia, it only made the heavy tension pressing down on her all the more suffocating. Walking beside Alexander, her heels tapped a steady rhythm against the floor. The deep wine-red dress she wore made her stand out, a splash of color amid the muted elegance. Yet it also turned her into the focus of every critical gaze. Clutching the strap of her purse lightly, she drew a deep breath to steady herself.
It's just a role,
she reminded herself. Alexander's calm voice broke through her thoughts. Alexander low, steady.
Keep smiling. They're watching.
Sophia's lips curved into a faint smirk, her tone laced with irony. Sophia.
Do I look like a display piece to you?
Alexander's mouth quirked in the ghost of a smile. Alexander.
Tonight, you're the centerpiece.
Sophia's gaze swept over the room, a quiet unease simmering beneath her calm exterior, but she straightened her spine, reminding herself.
If I'm to play this part, I'll play it flawlessly.
Alexander offered no response, though his eyes lingered on her, holding something indecipherable, a flicker of an emotion she couldn't quite name. The music continued to drift through the gilded space, each note delicate and deliberate, as the glimmering facade of the evening stretched on. Sophia held her ground, her expression poised and confident, even as a single question echoed in her mind.
Will I make it through tonight?
Sophia stepped into the ballroom, the deep wine-red dress clinging delicately to her petite frame, a bold and striking stroke of color against the lavish yet icy canvas of the evening. Though the design of the gown was simple, lacking the extravagance of other dazzling evening dresses, its quiet elegance drew every eye in the room to her, effortlessly making her the center of attention. Conversations faltered for a few seconds. Subtle yet sharp glances flickered her way from the small clusters of powerful guests scattered across the room. No words were spoken, but Sophia could feel the weight of their stares, the curiosity, the judgment, and perhaps even a trace of doubt. She inhaled deeply, fighting to steady her breathing. Her heels clicked softly against the gleaming wooden floor, the rhythm deliberate yet betraying a hint of hesitation. Beside her, Alexander strode forward with an air of effortless confidence, as though he owned the entire world. The perfectly tailored black suit only accentuated his broad shoulders and commanding stature. His sharp gaze swept across the crowd, each step a quiet declaration of control, an unspoken reminder that everything in this room belonged in the palm of his hand. Sophia tilted her head slightly toward him, whispering with a mix of restraint and quiet anxiety. Sophia softly.
Everyone's looking at me like I'm the star of tonight's show.
Alexander glanced at her, his lips quirking into the faintest of smirks, a smile that was equal parts composed and unreadable. Alexander calmly, unwavering.
They're just curious. Play your part.
She faltered for a beat, irritated by his unshakable composure, but chose not to argue. His words were a cold reminder of the role she had agreed to play. Drawing in a steadying breath, she forced a soft, practiced smile onto her lips, though the dampness in her palms betrayed her nerves. From across the room, a group of elegantly dressed women murmured amongst themselves, their eyes unabashedly trained on Sophia. One of them let out a quiet laugh, a feathered fan flicking lightly in front of her face to veil whatever comment she had just made. Sophia muttering to herself, barely audible.
It's like being on stage in a play.
Alexander heard her but didn't respond. Instead, his hand moved gently to rest at the crook of her elbow, guiding her deeper into the room with a gesture that was equal parts reassurance and silent command. His presence was an unspoken shield, standing firm between her and the critical stares that sought to tear her apart. Sophia cast him a brief glance, and for a fleeting moment, it struck her no matter how distant or cold he might seem, here and now, he was the only anchor she had. She gave a small nod, and slowly, the smile on her lips began to feel less forced. Together, they moved further into the heart of the ballroom. The space seemed to hold its breath for just a moment, as though everyone awaited something, some revelation or performance from the mysterious girl in the red dress. Lifting her chin slightly, Sophia let her gaze settle with quiet resolve, a glint of determination sparking in her eyes. All right, she thought. If this is a play, I refuse to be the worst actor on stage. Sophia stepped into the center of the ballroom, the smile on her lips growing increasingly natural, masking the uncertainty that had marked her earlier steps. The curious, scrutinizing glances around her slowly gave way to amusement and interest as she began to blend into the rhythm of the evening. Near a table close by, a group of guests had gathered, gentlemen in impeccably tailored suits and ladies in dazzling gowns, engaged in polite, measured conversation. Sensing their attention shift toward her, Sophia took a steady breath, relaxed her shoulders, and approached. A silver-haired woman, her hair swept elegantly into a bun and pearls glimmering at her neck, tilted her head slightly as she regarded Sophia. Her sharp eyes held a glimmer of curiosity beneath their practiced civility. Edie with a gracious smile.
So you must be Alexander's mysterious fiancée?
Sophia nodded, her radiant smile never wavering. She knew now that confidence was the best shield she could wield. Sophia softly, with a touch of humor.
Yes, that would be me. Though I assure you, I'm far less mysterious than you might imagine.
A few quiet chuckles rippled through the small group at her light-hearted remark. Encouraged, Sophia eased into the conversation, instinctively finding her footing. Sophia with a playful smile, her eyes brightening.
Honestly, I don't have much experience with these kinds of grand events. I'm most at home in front of a canvas and a set of paintbrushes. Every time I finish a painting, I spend at least 3 days scraping paint off my clothes and out of my hair.
The comment drew warm laughter, including from an older gentleman with a distinguished white beard seated nearby. Lowering his wine glass, he looked at Sophia with genuine interest. Gentleman in a deep, amused voice.
So you're an artist? How refreshing. I've tried my hand at painting a few times myself, but the results, well, let's just say they resembled a child's coloring book.
Sophia's laughter was soft and melodic, her expression kind as she replied. Sophia.
Art isn't about perfection, sir. It's about how we express ourselves. If picking up a brush brought you joy, then I'd say your painting was already a success.
Her words carried such sincerity that the older gentleman laughed heartily, lightly clapping a hand against his knee. Gentleman.
You're quite the charmer, aren't you? Alexander, I must say, your fiancé is a delightful surprise. It seems you found someone who can win over a room with ease.
Alexander stood a few steps away, observing the exchange with his usual composed air. He offered only a subtle nod, his expression impassive. Yet his gaze lingered on Sophia a beat longer than usual. Something about the way she had effortlessly drawn the room's attention, so poised, so unforced, left him quietly surprised. And perhaps, in some unspoken way, pleased. From across the ballroom, Margaret stood near a banquet table, a glass of wine in hand. Her sharp, calculating gaze tracked Sophia's movements, watching each gesture and expression with meticulous care. At first, her expression remained unreadable, stern, enigmatic, but when she noticed the laughter and the captivated looks from the guests, a faint, almost imperceptible smile curved her lips. No one saw it, for moments later, she turned away as if she had never been watching. Sophia noticed Alexander approaching her, his footsteps quiet but deliberate. When he leaned in slightly to speak, his voice was low, edged with something softer than his usual reserve. Alexander quietly, with a touch of acknowledgement.
You're doing well.
Sophia arched a brow, her lips curling into a playful smirk. Sophia lightly.
I told you, I'm a good actress.
But even as she jested, a strange feeling swelled in her chest. The laughter, the friendly eyes focused on her, whether out of genuine warmth or polite courtesy, left her feeling a little lighter. For the first time since stepping into this gilded world, she didn't feel entirely out of place. And yet, deep down, she knew. The real challenges were still waiting, lurking quietly ahead. Sophia exhaled a brief breath of relief before a low voice interrupted her. Elliot mocking.
Better than I expected. But tell me, where does someone like you come from?
She turned to see Elliot, wine glass in hand, relaxed but confrontational. His smirk was more challenge than friendliness, his sharp gaze cutting through. Sophia firmly.
I don't need your judgment.
Elliot's smirk widened. Elliot lightly, with a warning.
Just curious. You play your part well, but this family isn't simple. One wrong move and...
His words, half taunt, half warning, tightened something in Sophia's chest, but she stood her ground. Sophia calmly.
Thanks for the warning, but I don't fall easily.
Elliot chuckled, a flicker of surprise in his eyes. Elliot sarcastic.
I'll enjoy watching your performance, Alexander's fiancé.
He walked away, leaving an air of tension. Sophia steadied her breath, refusing to let unease show. She knew he was testing her but wouldn't let him win. A warm voice broke her focus. Lady.
Miss Sophia, tell us about your art. I hear you're a painter.
Sophia nodded, her confidence returning. Sophia smiling.
I am. Let me tell you about the strangest painting I ever made.
She engaged the group with ease, hiding the tension Elliot left behind. Inside, she thought.
Try all you want, Elliot. You won't shake me.
From across the room, Alexander paused, noticing Sophia commanding the group's attention. A faint, satisfied expression crossed his face before it darkened slightly as his gaze shifted to where Elliot had disappeared. The ballroom buzzed with music and laughter, masking the quiet battle of wits underway. Sophia stood firm, her quiet determination a small flame in the opulent, cold Blake family world. Alexander stood at a distance, leaning casually against a marble column, his sharp gaze unwavering, like a seasoned observer. His expression remained calm and composed as always, yet his eyes were fixed on Sophia, who stood out effortlessly among the guests, entirely unaware that she had become the focal point of his attention. Sophia, dressed in that understated yet striking wine-red gown, continued to charm the guests around her. Her hand held a glass of wine with ease, and her brown eyes sparkled as she recounted stories of her art, her words laced with a mix of wit and sincerity that drew laughter from those listening. Nearby, an older lady clasped Sophia's hand gently, her expression warm with genuine delight. Lady with a kind smile.
You're such a refreshing young woman, Sophia. Not many can hold on to such ease in events as rigid as this.
Sophia smiled softly, a faint flush coloring her cheeks, not from embarrassment, but from the quiet satisfaction of finally finding her footing in this suffocating world. From his corner, Alexander narrowed his eyes slightly, the faintest hint of a smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. It was barely there, fleeting, but undeniable, a strange mix of surprise, quiet approval, and something else he couldn't quite name. He pushed off the column and began to walk toward her, the polished leather of his shoes clicking softly against the gleaming wooden floor. As he approached, the guests around Sophia gradually drifted away, as though Alexander's presence alone shifted the very atmosphere in the room. Sophia looked up and caught his gaze. She faltered for just a moment, the smile lingering on her lips softening slightly as a trace of uncertainty crept into her expression. Alexander low, his tone quieter than usual but still scrutinizing.
You're doing well. Keep it up.
Sophia raised an eyebrow, startled by the rare compliment. A retort sat on the tip of her tongue, something light and teasing, as was her habit, but the words faltered when she met his eyes. There was something different in his gaze tonight, something less distant and aloof than she was used to. It was a fleeting moment, but enough for Sophia to realize that beneath his practiced arrogance and unshakable composure, Alexander was observing her in a way he hadn't before. He wasn't just assessing her performance, he was seeing her, the person beneath the role she had agreed to play. She turned away slightly, as if to escape the strange tension that stirred within her. Taking a sip of her wine, her eyes wandered to the small ensemble in the corner of the room. The gentle strains of the violin drifted through the air, its notes as soft and lingering as silk. Alexander remained beside her, silent now. Neither spoke, both seemingly absorbed in their own thoughts. But for Sophia, a question echoed faintly in her mind: was this truly just a transaction? Or was it becoming something more? Alexander glanced at her once more, tilting his head slightly as he studied her profile. From this close, he could see the golden light of the chandelier reflected in her deep brown eyes, eyes that held more emotion and complexity than she likely intended to reveal. He tightened his fingers briefly, a subconscious reaction to a feeling he couldn't quite name. The classical music continued its steady, enchanting rhythm, weaving through the space around them, as if amplifying the silence that hung between them. The lively laughter and hum of voices from the other guests faded into the periphery, leaving Sophia and Alexander momentarily cocooned in a space that felt entirely their own. Sophia glanced sideways at him again, her lips curving into a faint smile, one that held an edge of mystery. She said nothing, but something unspoken lingered in the air between them, weighty and yet delicate. She knew this was only the beginning of what she couldn't yet say. but somehow Alexander's presence beside her offered a strange, quiet comfort she hadn't expected. The ballroom remained bright and dazzling, the music floating softly through the gilded air. Yet in that moment, amidst all the grandeur and golden light, Sophia and Alexander stood together, wrapped in an unspoken stillness, a fragile, unfamiliar connection taking shape. Neither of them voiced their thoughts, but within them, questions began to form, unspoken, unanswered, and laced with emotions neither could yet define. Sophia inhaled deeply, her gaze fixed ahead as if grounding herself. But inside, a quiet conflict brewed. There was something in Alexander's eyes that unsettled her, something she couldn't forget, though she wasn't sure she wanted to. And this was only the beginning. Because when the night ended, when the music faded and the lights dimmed, the whispers, the unspoken conflicts, and the inevitable misunderstandings would either tear them apart or bind them closer together. The party was merely the prologue. Everything else would begin after the lights went out. The grand sitting room lay steeped in silence, a stark contrast to the laughter and chatter of the now finished party. The glow of the fireplace flickered against the walls, casting shifting shadows across the vintage wallpaper. Outside, snow fell steadily, blanketing the windows in a soft, blurry white, deepening the sense of isolation within the room. Sophia sat quietly on the sofa near the fire. The red of her gown stood out vividly in the dim light, though it no longer seemed to carry the confidence it once did. She leaned back, her gaze fixed on the flames dancing in the hearth, her mind a blank canvas. The creak of a door opening pulled her from her reverie. Alexander stepped in, his tie undone and exhaustion etched into his features. Alexander, his voice low.
"Why are you still here?"
Sophia with a faint, dry smile.
"Enjoying a moment of peace. Don't you think that party was a bit much for me?"
Alexander poured himself a glass of wine, then sank into the armchair across from her. His sharp gaze softened ever so slightly. "Alexander."
"You did well. Better than I expected."
Sophia blinked, momentarily caught off guard. She lowered her head as though unsure of what to make of his words. Sophia quietly.
"I thought you'd say I ruined everything."
Alexander said nothing, studying her for a long moment. Alexander almost absent-mindedly.
"You're not as fake as they are."
Sophia's head lifted, her eyes meeting his. The air between them stilled, their gazes holding longer than either intended. Finally, Sophia broke the silence with a quiet, softened laugh. "Sophia."
"You're surprising me, Alexander."
Alexander said nothing in return, merely taking a sip of his wine, his expression unreadable. The room fell silent again, but this time the stillness no longer felt heavy or strained. The soft crackle of the fire filled the space, its warm light painting their shadows against the walls, a small moment of peace in the midst of the snow-covered night. Tonight, between conflict and quiet, they had taken one uncertain step further into the strange game they played. Alexander entered the sitting room, his movements slow but deliberate. His footsteps were so quiet they barely made a sound, as if he wanted to observe Sophia before making his presence known. The firelight cast shifting shadows across his face, softening the sharp angles of his features, but doing little to dispel the gravity he carried with him. Sophia still sat near the fireplace, her small silhouette stretching long across the polished wooden floor, flickering with the rise and fall of the flames. Her fingers traced absently over the silver pendant at her neck, a small gesture, but one that carried the weight of unspoken thoughts. Her brown eyes, distant and unfocused, seemed lost in a place far beyond the walls of the Blake estate. Alexander paused near the doorway, his gaze lingering on her in silence. He didn't show it, but there was something about the mix of resilience and fragility in her posture that struck him, something he couldn't quite name. Yet, as if by habit, he cloaked himself in his usual cool detachment. Alexander, his brow faintly furrowed, voice measured.
"You're still here?" I thought you'd retire to your room after the party.
Sophia flinched slightly, as though pulled back to the present. She glanced up at him, her expression quickly slipping back into its usual calm. Shrugging lightly, she offered a faint, weary smile, one that felt more like a shield than anything else. Sophia.
Didn't you say I did well? I'm just savoring my little victory.
Her voice carried a hint of dry humor, just enough to remind Alexander that she wasn't someone who could be easily dismissed. Alexander crossed the room and sat in the chair opposite her. He placed his heavy whiskey glass on the table with a deliberate clink, the sound slicing through the silence like a blade. The gesture was unhurried but carried an edge that was impossible to ignore. Alexander calm but cutting.
You did better than I expected, but don't let that fool you into thinking you belong here.
The words landed like a quiet blow, sharp, precise, and cold. Sophia froze for a fraction of a second, the faint smile vanishing from her lips. Her fingers tightened around her wine glass, knuckles whitening from the pressure. She met his gaze head-on, her expression unflinching. Beneath the surface, a storm swirled in her eyes, though her voice remained steady and deceptively calm. Sophia.
I never thought I belonged here, Alexander. Don't worry, I remember this is just a performance.
Her words were firm, each syllable a deliberate reminder, not just to him but to herself. For a moment, Alexander faltered, caught off guard. There was something in her eyes that he hadn't expected, a quiet but fierce pride, tempered by a pain she refused to show. He had thought Sophia was merely stubborn and difficult to manage, but now he saw something more, someone who refused to break, no matter the pressure. Alexander, his voice quieter but sharp as ever.
Good. Then remember that. One misstep here could ruin everything.
Sophia's lips curved into the faintest smirk, though the fire in her eyes remained undiminished. Sophia.
Thank you for the warning, but I'm not the kind of person who falls so easily.
Silence fell over the room again. The crackling of the fire grew louder, as though filling the tense void left by their words. The golden glow played across their faces, casting warm light against the cold undertones of their conversation. Alexander studied her for a long moment, as if trying to see past the strength she wore so carefully, but he said nothing more. Instead, he lifted the whiskey glass to his lips, took a slow sip, and rose to his feet. His tall, imposing figure seemed to fill the room, his shadow stretching across the floor as he moved toward the door. Alexander pausing briefly, his voice low.
I'm not sure you understand what you're up against, Sophia.
Sophia said nothing in return, her eyes following him as he disappeared beyond the heavy door. Though her heart still beat unevenly in her chest, she refused to let herself sink into the waves of doubt swirling inside her. The room settled into silence once more, save for the soft crackle of the fire. The light flickered across Sophia's face, illuminating the quiet resolve etched into her features. She let out a slow breath, the sound soft and deliberate, a reminder to herself. Sophia whispering to herself.
If this is your game, Alexander, I won't be the one to lose.
Outside, the snow fell soundlessly beyond the tall windows, blanketing the night in an unforgiving stillness. But inside, something had shifted. The fire burning in Sophia's heart, small, determined, and fiercely alive, had been lit. The sitting room, once still as a tranquil lake, was disturbed when the door creaked open again. Elliot entered, as unhurried and composed as ever, but the smirk tugging at his lips seemed to lower the room's temperature several degrees. In his hand was a plain white envelope, unassuming in appearance, yet weighted with something far heavier than it seemed. Sophia's head lifted at the sound, and tension swept over her like a shadow. The firelight flickered across Elliot's face, accentuating the mocking glint in his eyes as he approached. His footsteps were soft but deliberate, each one echoing in the uneasy silence. Without ceremony, Elliot tossed the envelope onto the table between Sophia and Alexander. Elliot drawling, his tone sharp with mockery.
Sophia, I thought you might want to see this. A little insight into our free-spirited artist, Alex.
Sophia froze, her gaze darting to the envelope. Her breath caught in her throat, and her fingers instinctively gripped the edge of her dress. The way Elliot looked at her, so smug, so assured, told her he held something capable of wounding her. Alexander, seated opposite, shifted his attention from Elliot to the envelope. A coldness flickered across his features. Without a word, he reached for it, his movements slow, unhurried, but undeniably commanding. The sharp rustle of paper was the only sound as Alexander opened the envelope and withdrew its contents. Sophia could only sit frozen, her gaze dropping to the floor, as though she wished it might open up and swallow her whole. Alexander's expression darkened as his eyes scanned the pages. The documents detailed Sophia's mounting debts, financial troubles she had worked so hard to bury. Tucked within was a photograph of Sophia standing beside a man in a small cafe. Though there was nothing overtly intimate about the image, the angle and timing of the shot suggested otherwise. It was the kind of picture that could easily be misunderstood or manipulated. Alexander looked up, his gaze shadowed and sharp, the air between them crackling with unspoken accusation. Alexander, his voice low and cold.
"What is this?"
Sophia met his eyes, the pain and confusion in her own impossible to hide. She glanced briefly at Elliot, her expression seething with quiet fury, before turning back to Alexander. Her lips pressed into a thin line as she fought to steady herself. Sophia, her voice trembling but defiant.
"It's my business. You don't need to concern yourself with it."
Alexander, his tone clipped, razor sharp.
"Your business? Do you think I can ignore this when everything about you reflects on me?"
Sophia's hands clenched tightly, her nails biting into her palms as her heart pounded against her ribs. Still, she sat straight-backed, refusing to let his accusation break her. Sophia firmly, her voice steadying.
"I never denied that, Alexander, but I don't owe you an explanation for my personal life."
Elliot, lounging casually near the fireplace, shrugged with feigned indifference, though the satisfaction gleamed in his eyes. He was like a predator, delighting in the blood he had drawn. Elliot lightly taunting.
"Oh, and what about the photo? Should we just assume you're playing another role? A struggling artist with financial troubles, looking for an easy way out?"
Sophia cutting him off, her voice ringing with fury.
"That's enough, Elliot."
Her words sliced through the room like a blade. She shot to her feet, her brown eyes blazing as she turned to face him head-on. Anger and hurt mingled in her gaze, but it was the raw strength beneath that took him aback. Sophia, her voice shaking with emotion.
"What kind of person do you think I am? You don't know anything about me. What gives you the right to judge? Money and power don't give you the license to trample over others."
Elliot's smirk faltered for just a moment, surprise flickering in his expression before he straightened, the mocking smile returning, though weaker now. Elliot smoothly, though with less bite.
"I'm just stating the truth. But remember this, Sophia, this family isn't so easily deceived."
With that, he turned and strode toward the door, his footsteps echoing through the heavy silence. As the door clicked shut behind him, the tension lingered, thick and suffocating. Alexander remained seated, his gaze fixed on Sophia, as though trying to decipher every unspoken word, every hidden thought she guarded so fiercely. But this time, Sophia didn't look away. She stood her ground, facing him with unyielding determination, a silent challenge in her eyes. Sophia, her voice soft but clear.
"If you believe whatever Elliot brought you, then consider this your opportunity to end our arrangement."
Alexander's brow lifted slightly, a flicker of something, confusion, frustration, or something far more complex, crossing his features. But he said nothing. The fire crackled in the silence, the sound a stark contrast to the storm raging quietly between them. Sophia drew in a deep breath, then turned and walked away. Her figure disappeared beyond the heavy door, leaving Alexander alone in the silent room, his hand gripping the envelope so tightly that his knuckles turned white. Outside the window, The snow continued to fall relentlessly, covering every trace, every mark. Yet within them both, a crack had begun to form, a fracture neither could see, and one neither knew if time would ever mend. Sophia's hand froze on the doorknob, her breath shallow and uneven, her heart pounding so hard she could feel every beat. Elliot's words and Alexander's cold, accusing gaze lingered like knives in her chest, sharp, relentless, and cruelly precise. A torrent of anger and hurt surged within her, too strong to suppress. Turning back, Sophia walked toward them, each step measured, deliberate, as though reclaiming her ground. Her brown eyes shone with a fierce, unwavering resolve, but beneath that fire lay a deep, unspoken ache. Alexander sat in silence, his hand still gripping the envelope as if it might shatter. His expression, though unreadable, darkened as he watched her approach. Elliot remained by the fireplace, his arms crossed, that insufferable smirk curling his lips, as though waiting for her to crumble. But instead of breaking, Sophia stood tall, meeting them both head-on. When she spoke, her voice was clear and steady, each word ringing like a bell through the heavy stillness of the room. Sophia, her voice strong, though trembling with repressed hurt.
I don't need to prove anything to either of you. This is a deal. I've done my part. But if you intend to use it as a weapon to humiliate me, then go ahead.
Her words reverberated through the space, cracking the smug veneer on Elliot's face and dimming Alexander's cold calm. Sophia stepped forward, setting her wine glass down on the table with a sharp, decisive clink that punctuated her sentence like a closing statement. Turning her gaze to Alexander, she looked at him not with fear but with something heavier, disappointment, hurt, and the remnants of trust now fraying at the edges. Sophia, her voice steady, cutting through the silence.
I thought you, of all people, understood this arrangement. I play my part, and you keep your perfect world intact. But if all you see when you look at me is something to judge and tear apart, then say it to my face.
Alexander said nothing. For a fleeting moment, his eyes flickered, something unspoken, something uncertain. It was there and gone in an instant, leaving behind a silence more weighted than words. From his spot, Elliot stood with his arms still folded, the smirk clinging stubbornly to his face, though a flicker of surprise betrayed him. He hadn't expected her to fight back. Sophia, her voice lowering, but resolute.
I'm tired of being judged for not fitting into this world. You can think what you want, call me desperate, call me an opportunist. But none of that makes me any less than you. I still have the right to hold on to the last bit of dignity I have.
Her final words fell heavy in the air, hanging between them like an unyielding wall. Without waiting for a response, Sophia turned sharply on her heel, her soft curls swaying as she strode toward the door. Her steps were brisk, purposeful, and unwavering, though tears shimmered in her eyes, threatening to break free. She refused to let either of them see. The door closed softly behind her, leaving Alexander and Elliot alone in the wake of her storm. The fire crackled in the hearth, its gentle snaps and hisses now deafening against the silence. Alexander remained seated, his gaze fixed on the wine glass Sophia had left behind. Her words echoed in his mind, lingering like wounds he couldn't ignore. For the first time, the sight of her pain sat uneasily with him, disrupting the cold resolve he had always relied upon. Elliot lifted his whiskey glass, breaking the silence with a voice laced in feigned nonchalance. Elliot softly, with a smirk.
She's not as simple as she seems, is she? But tell me, cousin, are you still so sure she's only playing her role?
Alexander didn't respond. He stared at the flickering fire, his face carefully blank, but his hand gripped the envelope so tightly that his knuckles turned white. Outside, snow fell relentlessly, a silent curtain of white burying everything it touched. Yet beneath the quiet facade of the Blake estate, a storm had begun to churn between Sophia, Alexander, and the truth neither of them was ready to confront. Alexander sat silently in the living room, the large leather chair seeming to swallow him whole. His hand gripped a glass of whiskey, the amber liquid rippling under the glow of the firelight, though he never brought it to his lips. His eyes were fixed on the photograph on the table, Sophia standing next to a stranger. The image blurred yet clear enough to plant a seed of doubt deep in his heart. Elliot's footsteps echoed as he walked away, a taunting half-smile still lingering on his face. He paused briefly before exiting the room, his hand nudging the half-open door. Elliot softly, with quiet insinuation.
Be careful, Alexander. Trust can be the most expensive thing in this world.
The door closed behind Elliot, leaving an oppressive silence in the room. Only the crackling of wood in the fireplace remained, a small sound that somehow reverberated through Alexander's mind. He leaned back in his chair, pressing his fingers hard against his temples, as if to drive out the thoughts that churned relentlessly in his head. He wanted to stay rational, to let logic prevail, but the image of Sophia's resolute yet pained eyes kept surfacing before him.
I don't need to prove anything to any of you.
Her voice still echoed in his mind, each word cutting sharp and deep. Sophia had spoken with unwavering determination and dignity, as if she were standing against the entire world to defend herself. She hadn't cried, hadn't begged, she had simply stood there, strong and unyielding. That unsettled him more than anything, as though he had unwittingly shattered something precious and fragile. Alexander's gaze returned to the photograph. Sophia's face was smiling, yet from his current perspective, it was a puzzle without an answer. He didn't want to believe that Sophia was the kind of woman Elliot implied she was, but the documents about the debts, the photograph, they were too clear, too damning to ignore. A familiar feeling of helplessness rose in his chest, an emotion he had long mastered the art of suppressing. Alexander had always prided himself on seeing through people, on controlling every situation. But with Sophia, it was different. She wasn't like anyone he'd ever known, not sweetly false, not sycophantic. She was sharp-edged and painfully genuine, and that was precisely what left him so conflicted. Alexander stood and moved toward the large window. Outside, snow fell in a silent, endless cascade, blanketing every trace of what had come before. He stared out into the infinite whiteness, his heart heavy with an unnameable weight. Alexander murmuring, almost to himself,
Sophia, who are you really?
No answer came back, only the soft sound of snowflakes tapping against the window pane, tiny whispers of winter's mystery. Alexander clenched his fist at his side, his eyes darkening, deep and unfathomable as the ocean. Everything pointed to Sophia being untrustworthy, yet deep down, something in him still wanted to believe her. To believe that, after everything, she wasn't what Elliot insinuated, and that was what tore at him the most. Alexander turned back, his eyes unconsciously lingering on the door where Sophia had just walked out. As if beyond that door lay an answer waiting for him, or perhaps a truth he wasn't ready to face. The fire crackled on, but the room somehow felt a few degrees colder. Alexander sank back into the chair, lifting the glass of whiskey to his lips, but just as it touched, he set it back on the table. His gaze drifted once more to the door, where the silhouette of Sophia's resilient yet lonely figure had disappeared. Outside, the snow fell heavily, but the true storm raged within Alexander's heart. Would he overcome his doubts and see Sophia for who she truly was? And Sophia, after this betrayal, would she have enough faith left to continue the charade, or would she choose to let it all go? The pale morning light crept through the frost-covered window, casting faint shadows against the gray walls of Sophia's small room. The silence was heavy, broken only by the weak rays of sun stretching across the wooden floor, blending with the cold, white glow of the snow piled high outside. There wasn't much to say about the room itself: a small bed draped with a thin blanket, a simple table by the window with a few personal belongings, and an old, worn suitcase sitting in the middle of the room, a stark reminder that Sophia had never truly belonged here. On the wooden table, a few abandoned sheets of sketch paper lay scattered. Half-finished drawings, an incomplete portrait, rough sketches of the mansion and the snow-covered landscape, mirrored Sophia's current state of mind, unstable, uncertain, and searching for an escape she couldn't seem to find. Outside the window, snow continued to fall, blanketing the forest surrounding the Blake estate. The bare branches of the trees bent under the weight of the heavy frost, while the wind whispered through the cracks in the window frame, a sharp, chilling sound, like the cruel murmurs of a merciless winter. The sound of a zipper being pulled shattered the silence, making the room feel even lonelier, heavier somehow. Sophia sat on the edge of the bed, her hands trembling slightly as she zipped up the old suitcase. She had packed nearly everything she owned: a few worn clothes, her drawing tools, and a handful of small, insignificant trinkets. Her entire life, in the end, fit neatly into a single scuffed suitcase. Sophia took a deep breath, staring at the suitcase with dark, weary eyes that held pain and exhaustion. From last night until now, Elliot's words and Alexander's cold, accusatory gaze had echoed relentlessly in her mind, an unending ache that refused to fade. Her fingers brushed against the silver pendant around her neck, an old habit whenever she needed to calm herself. It was the last gift her mother had given her, the only thing left that made her feel safe in moments of weakness. Sophia whispering to herself, voice catching,
I shouldn't have come here in the first place.
She lifted her head to look out the window. The world outside was blanketed in white, breathtaking yet lifeless in its beauty. It was a perfect reflection of the world she now faced: opulent, magnificent, but with no place for someone like her, someone who was merely playing a role in Alexander Blake's flawless story. Sophia sat on the floor, her old suitcase open before her, its frayed edges a testament to years of travel. Inside, she placed simple clothes, a worn scarf, sketchbooks, and a small paint box. Her hands trembled slightly as she folded each item, treating them like fragile memories. Though the suitcase filled, the emptiness in her heart deepened. The sharp sound of the zipper broke the silence as she sat on the bed, her gaze drifting blankly. Her hand reached for the silver pendant around her neck, the only keepsake from her mother. She ran her fingers over the cold metal, her eyes momentarily blurring with unshed tears. Sophia whispering,
I don't belong here. Better to leave now.
She drew a shaky breath, gripping the pendant as if it anchored her courage. With a soft sigh, she stood, dragging the suitcase across the wooden floor, its wheels echoing loudly. At the door, she paused, looking back at the empty room before turning the knob. Sophia softly,
It's over.
The door creaked open, pale light spilling in as her shadow stretched across the floor. Without a glance back, she stepped out, her movements steady and resolute. Downstairs, Alexander stood motionless, the faint scrape of her suitcase cutting through the stillness like a blade. When she appeared at the staircase, her small figure and the suitcase by her side seemed to confirm her decision. Sophia descended the stairs without pause, her eyes fixed ahead. Alexander clenched his fist, struggling to speak. Alexander softly,
You're really leaving?
Sophia heard him but didn't stop, knowing hesitation would shatter her resolve. Passing him, she stepped into the cold air, the door closing behind her. Alexander remained still, watching her disappear into the falling snow. The snow continued, covering the mansion grounds in silence, as if erasing all traces of her departure. Alexander lifted a hand to his forehead, his brows furrowing under a growing emptiness he couldn't define or escape. The hallway stretched long and silent, faint light filtering through the frosted windows and spilling onto the polished wooden floor, reflecting a faint, blurred image of Sophia as she dragged her old, battered suitcase. The sound of its wheels rolling across the floor echoed steadily, matching the heavy rhythm of her heart. Her steps were slow but resolute, as though each one carried the weight of her burdened soul. Just a few steps from the front door, Margaret's figure appeared at the far end of the hall, near the grand staircase. She stood tall, her arms crossed over her chest, her regal presence accentuated by the deep emerald green of her long coat. She looked like a sculpture brought to life, powerful, sharp, yet concealing something inscrutable beneath the surface. Sophia froze when her eyes met Margaret's. For a moment she felt as if she'd been turned to stone, caught in the vast emptiness of this space. But then, as if fighting her own weakness, she bowed her head, tightened her grip on the suitcase, and pulled it forward. Margaret calm, but unmistakably sharp.
You intend to leave without saying goodbye?
Margaret's voice rang out, each word precise and heavy, making Sophia's steps falter. She stopped, her shoulders trembling faintly as she stood there, her head still bowed, trying to hide the way her eyes were reddening. Sophia soft, strained but composed.
I didn't think you'd need a goodbye from someone as deceitful as me.
The words escaped her lips like a breath, soft but as sharp as a dagger turned inward. She stood frozen, eyes fixed on the intricate patterns of the wooden floor. Though she had steeled herself for this moment, before Margaret, this fierce, discerning woman, her fragile confidence felt as though it might shatter. Margaret didn't respond immediately. She simply stared at Sophia, her sharp blue eyes searching for something within her. At last, the sternness in Margaret's expression softened slightly, like a cloud breaking apart to reveal a glimpse of sunlight. She stepped forward, the steady click of her heels tapping against the floor, breaking the silence. Margaret softly but firmly.
You may not belong here, but that doesn't mean you have no worth. Don't let the words of others dim who you are.
Sophia's head lifted, her brown eyes widening in surprise. Margaret's words struck her deeply, peeling back a layer of the insecurity she had always hidden away. For a brief moment, Sophia looked at Margaret with an expression of mixed gratitude and pain. Her lips pressed together tightly, unsure of how to respond. Margaret's words, though gentle, felt as though they were stripping away the thorns Sophia had so carefully wrapped around herself. And yet, deep down, she still couldn't shake the feeling of being an outsider in this world. Sophia small, but resolute.
I don't want to be a burden any longer.
Margaret watched her for a long moment, her sharp gaze clouded by a fleeting sadness few had ever seen. To Margaret, Sophia was more than just an outsider. She was a reflection of something Margaret herself didn't want to admit, someone brave enough to fight against their fate no matter the cost. Margaret sighed softly but said no more. Margaret, a whisper, almost tender.
You have more value than you know, Sophia. Remember that?
Sophia didn't answer. She simply nodded, a small, almost imperceptible gesture of acknowledgement. Then, turning away, she resumed walking toward the front door. The wheels of her suitcase began rolling again, the sound now quieter, slower, as though mirroring the heaviness in her heart. Margaret stood unmoving, her eyes following the small figure, until Sophia disappeared beyond the grand doorway. Outside, the snow continued to fall relentlessly, covering the expansive grounds in a blanket of white. On the other side of the door, Sophia paused for a moment, taking in a deep breath as the cold winter air stung her face. Despite the lingering ache in her chest, Margaret's words echoed softly in her mind, a small ray of light piercing through the darkness. She tightened her grip on the suitcase handle, her gaze fixed straight ahead toward the gates, the path leading her away from this world of grandeur, a world she believed she could never belong to. But was this truly the end, or the beginning of something far greater, something Sophia had yet to realize? Sophia dragged the heavy suitcase down the grand staircase, the sound of its wheels echoing through the vast, empty space like a final farewell. The Blake mansion, magnificent yet hollow, felt like a frozen painting watching her every step. At the front door, she hesitated, her shoulders trembling beneath the weight of her thick coat. She turned back for a fleeting glance at the grand foyer and the chandelier above, its golden light spilling softly across the room. Everything was perfect, and yet so distant. A world she had never truly belonged to. Sophia lifted her gaze toward the upper floors, wondering if Alexander was there, silently watching her leave. Sophia to herself.
Is this the right decision? But this place was never meant for me.
She smiled faintly, a sad, almost bitter curve of her lips. then shook her head and pushed the door open. Blinding white light flooded in, the front courtyard blanketed in snow, and the wind tugged at her hair as though trying to pull her back. Stepping over the threshold, Sophia moved toward the iron gates, where the snow-covered road awaited her. For a fleeting moment, a whisper of hope crept into her heart, Sophia softly, as though to the wind.
Alexander, will you stop me?
She stopped, turning to look back at the mansion one last time. There was no one there, only the silent house standing stoically amidst the falling snow. Sophia turned away, her gaze heavy with sorrow, though determination still shone through. On the second floor, Alexander leaned against the window frame, his eyes following her retreating figure. His hand clenched tightly at his side, a nameless sense of loss settling deep within him. Would he overcome his pride to stop her? And Sophia, would she truly leave him behind forever? Alexander's study was shrouded in darkness, the only light coming from the desk lamp casting a dim glow over the mess of scattered documents. Files lay open, the photograph from Elliot's envelope tossed carelessly on the desk. Outside the window, the snow fell heavily, the faint whistle of the wind adding to the suffocating stillness. Alexander stood motionless by the desk, one hand tangled in his hair, his usually sharp gaze now distant, clouded with turmoil. The white envelope before him revealed glimpses of the photos of Sophia. He glanced at them, his heart stirring restlessly. Alexander muttering,
"Damn it, what the hell is all this?"
He turned and picked up the photo of Sophia standing next to an unfamiliar man. The smile in the picture didn't belong to the strong, defiant woman who had looked at him the night before. The photo slipped from his fingers, falling back onto the desk. Alexander gripped the windowsill tightly, his gaze fixed on the snowstorm outside, regret weighing heavy on his chest. Alexander bitterly,
"What have I done, Sophia?"
The image of Sophia pulling her suitcase, the hurt in her eyes, and her final words echoed in his mind.
"I never thought I belonged here."
For the first time, Alexander felt he had made a mistake. He stepped back, collapsing into the chair, his fists clenching tightly. Elliot's insinuations clashed violently with the voice inside him.
"If it was all a lie, then why do I feel like this?"
His eyes opened, resolve hardening within him. He stood abruptly, grabbed his coat, and strode purposefully toward the door. Alexander whispering,
"I can't let her go."
The door clicked shut behind him, leaving the room in silence once more. Outside, the snow continued to fall, but this time Alexander was ready to act. Alexander sat upright, his eyes hardening as he stared at the photograph in his hand. The image of Sophia standing next to an unfamiliar man no longer seemed like the undeniable evidence Elliot had claimed it to be. He flipped the photo over and found a small line of handwriting scrawled in pen.
"New York, September."
A detail Elliot had either missed or deliberately withheld. Alexander's brow furrowed, suspicion rising in him like a tidal wave. He couldn't rely on what he had been shown alone. Reaching for the phone, he quickly dialed the number of a close friend in the financial industry. Alexander urgent but controlled.
"David, I need you to look into someone for me. Sophia Grant. Can you check if there are any large debts connected to her? I want the source and the real reason behind them."
On the other end, David sounded surprised but serious. David.
"Sophia Grant? All right, give me a few hours. I'll get you everything I can as soon as possible."
Alexander hung up, his dark gaze fixed on the photograph, as if willing it to reveal its hidden secrets. Leaning back into his chair, he drummed his fingers lightly against the desk, his mind racing with only one question.
Why is she really here? And why did I believe Elliot so easily?
His eyes landed, almost by accident, on a small gift box sitting quietly among the scattered papers. He frowned, reaching for it. The box was simple, wrapped in plain craft paper and tied with a delicate red ribbon. Carefully, Alexander opened it. Inside was a small wooden picture frame, brand new. The artwork within was a gentle, intricate sketch, a tiny house nestled among snow-covered pines, warm golden light glowing from the windows. It exuded a quiet, almost tangible peace. At the bottom of the drawing, a carefully written note read,
"Thank you for showing me a warm place, even if only for a moment."
Alexander froze. The simplicity of the gift felt heavy with sincerity, so far removed from the story Elliot had tried to spin about her. Something tightened in his chest as memories surfaced, Sophia's eyes, her hesitant yet earnest words, and the unguarded smile she sometimes let slip. Setting the frame down, Alexander ran a hand over his forehead, his fingers pressing against his temples. A sharp pang of regret dug into him. Something was wrong. He knew it now. Sophia wasn't what Elliot had made her out to be. Alexander low, resolute.
I misjudged her.
He stood abruptly, shrugging his coat back on and striding toward the door. The sound of his hurried footsteps echoed through the silent house, a sign of a decision that could no longer wait. Outside, the snow fell relentlessly, blanketing every path in white. But this time, Alexander's mind was clear, clearer than it had ever been. He needed to uncover the truth. And more than that, he had to find Sophia before it was too late. Alexander moved quickly down the grand hall of the mansion, his breath shallow, the chill seeping through the fibers of his coat, though he hardly noticed. One thought consumed his mind: find Sophia before it's too late. His hand unconsciously tightened around the small gift box Sophia had left behind. He came to a halt beside the large table in the foyer, his gaze locked on the box, as if it held the answers to all the chaos swirling inside him. Alexander opened it. Inside was a small, carefully hand-painted picture. The scene depicted a modest wooden cabin nestled among snow-laden pines. From the windows, warm golden light spilled out, soft and inviting, a stark contrast to the cold, desolate landscape surrounding it. His hands trembled slightly as he turned the frame over. On the back, a single line was written in delicate, deliberate handwriting.
Sometimes, home isn't where we were born, but where we find ourselves.
The words sliced through Alexander like a knife. He gripped the picture tightly, his eyes fixed on the inscription as though he could burn it into his memory. Sophia's face flashed through his mind, the pain in her eyes that day as she said she didn't belong here. Now, at last, he understood the true meaning behind her words. The picture and those carefully chosen words weren't just a gift, they were Sophia's message, a whisper from her heart, given to a man she must have trusted. And he had destroyed it all. Alexander closed his eyes, his jaw clenching as he fought to contain the surge of emotions crashing through him. Regret swelled, a tidal wave overwhelming every ounce of his pride. Alexander hoarse, barely above a whisper.
Sophia, I was wrong.
He lifted his head, his eyes igniting with a fierce resolve. There was no hesitation left in him. Alexander strode toward the door, the small painting clutched tightly in his hand like a talisman, a reminder that he had to make this right, no matter what it cost him. Outside, the snow fell relentlessly, covering every path in an endless sheet of white. But within Alexander, a fire had been lit. He would not let her walk out of his life, not now that he understood where home truly was. The phone in Alexander's coat pocket buzzed, breaking through the sound of the wind howling outside the mansion's grand doors. He stopped, his sharp eyes clouded with urgency as he stared at the screen. David's name flashed, and he answered immediately. Alexander urgent but composed.
Tell me, what did you find?
On the other end, David's voice was steady, though tinged with surprise. David.
Alexander, I looked closely into that debt you mentioned, but it's not Sophia's.
Alexander froze. His grip on the small framed painting tightened, his knuckles turning white. Alexander, his voice dropping, tense.
What do you mean?
David exhaled, his tone weighted with gravity. David.
Sophia took on that debt for an old friend. The guy tricked her, putting everything in her name. Instead of suing him and sending him to prison, she decided to pay it off herself. She did it to protect him, believing everyone deserves a second chance.
The world seemed to stop in that moment. Alexander stood frozen, every word David had spoken reverberating in his mind like hammer blows. Sophia had sacrificed herself for someone else, bearing the shame, the burden, and yet he, a man so sure of his own judgment, had misread everything and caused her even more pain. The phone slipped slightly from his ear as he set it down on the nearby table, his shoulders heavy, as if all his strength had been drained. His hand came up to cover his face, his eyes staring blankly into the distance. Memories flooded back, crystal clear now Sophia, silent and bowed under Elliot's cruel taunts. The pride in her voice when she said,
"I never thought I belonged here."
The tremor in her hands as she clutched her pendant, her last source of strength, and the painting with its quiet, haunting message.
Sometimes home isn't where we were born, but where we find ourselves.
A sharp ache pierced Alexander's chest. Everything he had believed, that Sophia was manipulative, deceitful, shattered completely. The truth was far harsher. Sophia had endured it all in silence, without complaint, because of a goodness and a grace that few could ever understand. Alexander, barely a whisper, filled with regret.
"Sophia, I was wrong, so wrong."
He inhaled deeply, the air filling his lungs like fuel, and resolve blazed through him. He couldn't let her walk out of his life. Not now, not like this, not after everything he had done. Snatching the phone back up, his voice was clear, unwavering this time. "Alexander."
"David, thank you. One more thing. I need you to find me every train or bus leaving Vermont this morning."
David, surprised.
"What are you planning?"
Alexander, firm, decisive.
"I'm going to find her, right now."
He ended the call and strode quickly to the door. Outside, the snow was still falling heavily, but Alexander didn't care. He threw open the grand doors, the icy wind rushing in to sting his face, but this time, it only sharpened his focus. He knew he didn't have much time. Sophia was slipping away from him, carrying a heart full of wounds and misunderstandings. But Alexander wouldn't let that happen, not now that he understood the truth, and not when he knew what truly mattered. Alexander charged into the snowstorm, each step strong and resolute, as if determined to push through the blizzard itself to reach her. The small train station in Vermont was buried under a blanket of snow. Golden light spilled from the lamps onto the desolate platform, while the crackling announcements echoed softly, blending with the sound of the cold wind rustling through the air. Sophia stood near the edge of the platform, her gray wool scarf wrapped tightly around her neck, her hand clutching the handle of her suitcase. Her distant gaze rested on the faint outline of the tracks. In the distance, the headlight of an approaching train pierced through the mist, the screech of metal against steel making her heart skip a beat. Sophia to herself.
"It's over, Sophia. This role ends here."
She lowered her head, tugging the scarf closer, as if searching for warmth amidst the relentless cold. Not far away, Alexander ran toward the station, his breath ragged, snow clinging to his hair and coat. His eyes swept over the platform, frantic and searching. Fear gripped him, the fear that if he didn't stop her now, he might lose her forever. Her small figure stood near the tracks, so still, so alone against the endless white snow. The sight of her only pushed him to move faster, ignoring the snow that soaked through his shoes and numbed his steps. Alexander, a whisper, breathless.
"Wait for me, Sophia. Don't go."
The train's whistle blared, shattering the stillness. Sophia bent down, lifting her suitcase, her feet shifting as if to step forward. But then, through the chaos of sound, a voice broke through, clear and desperate. "Alexander."
"Sophia."
Alexander calling out, his voice urgent.
"Sophia? Wait."
Sophia froze for a fraction of a second. His voice cut through the suffocating stillness like a blade, sharp and unrelenting. Slowly, she turned her head, surprise flickering across her face before her expression hardened again. She turned away, pulling her suitcase and quickening her steps toward the train that had just come to a stop, its wheels hissing faintly against the snow-covered tracks. The icy air slipped through the thick scarf wrapped around her neck, but it couldn't compare to the cold weight pressing down on her heart. Sophia firmly, without turning back.
"Why are you here, Alexander? It's over."
Alexander caught up to her, his hand reaching out to grasp her arm, gently but firmly enough to stop her in her tracks. He turned her toward him, and Sophia looked up, her deep brown eyes reflecting confusion and barely contained anger. Alexander hurriedly, his voice heavy with regret.
"You can't go. I can't let you leave this place."
They stood there, staring at each other in silence. The wind howled around them, whipping snowflakes through the space that seemed to stretch and shrink with every breath. Sophia, her voice trembling but cold.
"Alexander, it's over. I played my part. Now let me go."
Alexander held her gaze, his own no longer distant or guarded. For the first time, there was vulnerability there, raw and unfiltered, something Sophia had never seen before. Alexander softly, his voice rough.
"Sophia, this isn't an act."
Sophia faltered, her lips parting slightly, as though his words had struck a fragile chord deep within her. She took a small step back, her eyes clouded with disbelief. Sophia weakly.
"What are you saying? Don't play games with me, Alexander. I'm tired."
Alexander cutting her off, his voice spilling over with emotion.
"I was wrong, Sophia. Everything I thought about you, everything I said, I was wrong. I can't let you walk out of my life like this."
The train's whistle blared again, pulling both of them back into the harsh present. The train was ready to depart. Sophia turned toward the carriages, her gaze wavering as though she was waging a war within herself. Not letting her slip away, Alexander stepped closer, his voice soft but resolute, each word anchoring her in place. "Alexander,
Please stay. Don't let my mistakes drive you away. Give me a chance to make this right."
Alexander stood in front of Sophia, his broad shoulders shielding her from the biting wind and swirling snow around them. His eyes were honest and profound, stripped of the cold arrogance that had once defined him. Alexander, his voice pleading, almost desperate.
"I was wrong, Sophia. I was wrong not to protect you from my family, wrong to ever doubt you. But I can't let you leave without telling you one thing."
Sophia remained still, her brown eyes glistening with unshed tears as she looked up at him. The cold wind whipped strands of her softly curled hair across her face, but she didn't notice. The ache in her heart trembled in her voice as she tried to remain strong. "Sophia."
"And what is that? That you regret it? That I'm just a terrible actress you no longer need?"
Alexander shook his head fiercely, as if trying to erase her words. His eyes were filled with pain and determination, like a man afraid that even a second of hesitation would see her disappear forever. He stepped closer, his hands gently resting on her shoulders, his voice lowering but weighted with emotion, every word etched into the cold air around them. "Alexander."
"No, Sophia, I love you."
Sophia froze. Her lips parted, as if she wanted to say something, but the words caught in her throat. Alexander continuing, his gaze unwavering.
"Not because you played the role of my fiancé, but because you were you. You taught me how to open my heart, how to see family in a way I never had before. You made me realize what I've been missing all my life. I don't want this to be a game anymore. I want you to be a real part of my life."
The train's whistle pierced the air again, long and urgent, as if urging Sophia to make her choice. She stared into Alexander's eyes, where emotions swirled, raw, unguarded, and real. Her tears finally broke free, a single drop trailing down her cheek. Sophia whispering, her voice breaking.
You love me?"
Alexander without hesitation.
"Yes, I love you, Sophia, and I'm begging you not to leave."
The wind howled and the snow continued to fall. But in that frozen moment, the warmth of his hands on her shoulders seemed to melt the ice that had settled deep within her. Sophia bowed her head, trying to hide the tears spilling from her eyes. Then slowly she looked back up at him, her gaze still glistening but now holding a fragile glimmer of hope she thought she'd long since lost. Sophia, her voice trembling.
"Are you sure this isn't just another performance, Alexander?"
Alexander's hands tightened gently on her shoulders, his eyes blazing with steadfast resolve. "Alexander,
"This time it's not an act. It's real. It's everything I have."
Sophia looked deep into Alexander's eyes, eyes that held far too much, truths she couldn't decide whether to believe or doubt. Tears traced silent paths down her cheeks, mingling with the biting cold of winter. Her hand tightened around the handle of her battered suitcase, as if clinging to the last shreds of her resolve. Sophia, her voice trembling, filled with pain.
"How do I know you're telling the truth? How do I know this isn't just another lie to make me stay?"
The train behind her grew louder, its rhythm insistent, as though urging her to make a choice. Time felt like it was slipping away, but Alexander stood unmoving before her, his gaze unwavering, resolute. Without warning, Alexander sank to his knees on the snow-covered ground. His shoes disappeared into the frosty whiteness, his hands resting on his knees as he looked up at Sophia. Snowflakes settled gently on his dark hair, but he didn't flinch, didn't care. Sophia froze, her eyes widening in disbelief. A few scattered passengers on the platform turned to look, hushed whispers rippling through the cold air. But Alexander didn't notice them. His focus was on her alone, his deep voice steady and clear, cutting through the freezing silence. "Alexander, low and sincere.
"Because I'm willing to lose everything just to keep you. My pride, my honor, none of it matters if I don't have you. Believe in me, just this once, Sophia. I'll prove it to you. But first, I need you to give me that chance."
The whistle of the train shrieked again, jolting Sophia back to the present. She stepped back, her shoulders trembling beneath her thick coat. Her eyes wavered, a storm of uncertainty brewing deep within. Her whole life, she had learned to stand tall, to never trust things that seemed too beautiful, too fragile, for fear of breaking all over again. Her hand shook as it gripped the handle of her suitcase, but the harder she held on, the heavier it felt. Every word Alexander spoke struck like a hammer against the walls she had so carefully built to protect herself. Closing her eyes for just a moment, Sophia drew in a deep breath, as though summoning all the courage she had left. Then slowly she let go of the suitcase. It dropped into the snow with a soft thud, the sound quiet but resounding between them like a bell tolling in the stillness. Alexander saw her hand release the handle, his breath catching in his chest, trembling with the weight of emotion. Sophia opened her eyes again, her tear-streaked gaze locking onto his, her voice soft but strong enough to shatter the silence between them. Sophia whispering,
"I don't know how much I can trust you, but I'm tired of running, Alexander."
A faint smile flickered across Alexander's face, like the sun breaking through the clouds after a relentless storm. He rose to his feet, brushing the snow lightly from his coat, but his eyes never strayed from hers. He moved toward her slowly, deliberately, as though afraid that a single sudden movement might cause her to disappear once more. Alexander softly, his voice a quiet promise.
"I won't let you regret this choice."
Sophia stared at him, her lips trembling slightly before. At last, the faintest of smiles appeared. Her heart was still bruised, her wounds still raw, but somewhere amidst the snow, his words, and the quiet space they shared, a sliver of hope began to flicker, fragile, yet alive. Alexander stepped closer to Sophia, his eyes never leaving her, as if afraid she might vanish into the swirling snow. He paused for just a single breath, then gently wrapped his arms around her, pulling her close, as though trying to bridge all the unspoken words that had kept them apart. Sophia froze in his embrace, her shoulders trembling faintly. The warmth of him seeped through the thick layers of her coat, melting away the icy cold that had surrounded her for so long. She closed her eyes, silent tears rolling down her cheeks, but a faint, almost imperceptible smile touched her lips, a quiet surrender after years of pain and guarded walls. The whistle of the train echoed in the distance, followed by the faint rumble of wheels rolling along the tracks. But now, Sophia no longer cared about that train. The battered suitcase sat quietly on the snow-dusted platform, slowly being covered by a layer of white, as if the past it carried was finally being buried, left behind to rest. Sophia internal monologue, softly, tearfully.
Maybe this is where I belong.
Alexander held her tighter, his chin resting gently atop her hair. In the vast, snow-covered expanse, it felt as though they had found each other, two souls connecting at last amidst a world that had always felt so cold and empty. He said nothing, but the strength of his embrace spoke louder than words. He would not lose her again. The scene faded as Alexander and Sophia stood together, holding each other on the snow-blanketed platform. Two small figures in the midst of a wintry world, yet their hearts had finally found warmth in one another. In the distance, the train slowly pulled out of the station, disappearing into the thick curtain of falling snow. The snowflakes continued to descend, soft and relentless, but this time, the cold no longer had the power to freeze their hearts. Their journey ahead would not be easy, but now they were ready to walk it together, and that was all that truly mattered. The living room glowed with the warm light of countless bulbs, the towering Christmas tree stretching to the ceiling, its lights twinkling like tiny stars. Beneath its branches, neatly arranged presents sat patiently, waiting for the magic of Christmas Eve. The fireplace roared with a golden blaze, spreading its comforting warmth throughout the spacious room, where the Blake family gathered in quiet companionship. On the coffee table, plates of cookies, steaming mugs of hot chocolate, and a bottle of ruby red wine sat invitingly. The faint sound of Christmas carols filled the air, blending with the distant tolling of church bells, weaving an atmosphere of pure serenity. Outside the window, snow fell gently, but the chill couldn't penetrate the peace that reigned within these walls. Sophia sat near the fire, both hands wrapped around a mug of hot chocolate. Her eyes glimmered softly, emotion welling up within her as a quiet shiver ran through her heart, the kind that comes when you feel, for the very first time, that you belong. Sophia whispering to herself.
I never thought I'd have a Christmas like this.
Across from her, Alexander watched her silently, his gaze holding a tenderness he had never shown before. Amidst all the perfection around them, he realized that Sophia herself was the most precious gift of all. Alexander softly.
You are my gift.
From a distance, Margaret sat still, her hands gently clasped in her lap. The flickering firelight played across her usually stern face, softening her features just slightly, though a quiet, unreadable thought seemed to linger behind her calm expression. The room was peaceful, but beneath the stillness, something unspoken lingered. Sophia lowered her gaze, her fingers tracing the rim of her cup, her joy mingling with an unnamed worry tugging at the edges of her heart. Alexander rose from his seat and walked toward her, resting a gentle hand on her shoulder. His touch radiated warmth, and Sophia looked up instinctively. Alexander softly.
Are you all right?
Sophia smiled faintly, nodding as her eyes softened, the shadows of her unease gradually dissipating. In the glow of the firelight, amidst the quiet laughter and the faint music, a new chapter began for them, one filled with promise, though still brimming with uncertainties waiting to unfold. The living room remained aglow with the golden light of Christmas, the fireplace casting a soft warmth across the space. On the long sofa near the tree, Sophia sat beside Alexander, her hand resting gently in his, a quiet peace settling over her, a feeling she had never known before. Margaret sat across from them, setting her mug of hot chocolate softly on the coffee table. Her gaze lingered on the two of them, softer than usual, carrying a warmth that matched the crackling fire. The faint strains of Christmas music drifted through the air, completing the tenderness of the moment. Margaret, her voice calm, her gaze warm.
This Christmas feels different, doesn't it? My son has finally learned to cherish what truly matters.
Alexander turned to look at Sophia, a smile playing on his lips, his eyes reflecting a depth of gratitude that needed no words. He gently squeezed her hand, a silent promise shared between them. Alexander softly, with deep sincerity.
Thank you for staying.
Sophia smiled, her eyes shimmering as they caught the glow of the Christmas tree lights. She leaned her head gently against his shoulder, her voice soft as a whisper, yet brimming with meaning. Sophia.
Thank you for giving me a reason to stay.
Margaret nodded subtly, her gaze lingering on the two of them, a look of quiet satisfaction crossing her face. The Christmas tree sparkled brightly in the warmth of the room, as though bearing witness to the newfound harmony of a family that had once been so cold. Outside the window, the snow continued to fall, but inside, a true home had been lit at last. Margaret held her glass of wine, her gaze drifting over Sophia and Alexander. She offered a soft nod, a gentle smile breaking through her usual stern demeanor. Yet, somewhere in her eyes, there lingered an unspoken thought, a fleeting glimpse of a secret left unsaid. Margaret softly, her voice warm.
This Christmas is truly unforgettable. Sophia, thank you for bringing something new to this family.
Near the Christmas tree, Elliot, who was usually sharp-tongued and teasing, unexpectedly raised his glass. His smile was so genuine it left Sophia momentarily surprised. Elliot.
Sophia, congratulations. You've done what few could. You've taught Alexander how to love.
Sophia let out a soft laugh, turning to Alexander with a look of tenderness. A wave of happiness swelled within her, warming her cheeks to a delicate pink under the glow of the lights. Sophia teasing lightly, her gaze on Alexander.
So I'm a miracle, am I?
Alexander shrugged, the corner of his lips lifting into a small smile, though his eyes couldn't hide the joy within them. Alexander, his voice low, yet steady.
A miracle I won't let slip away.
Margaret sipped her wine, her gaze turning distant, as though she'd been pulled into a quiet, private thought. Outside the window, snow fell softly, blanketing the mansion grounds in pristine white. In the calm of it all, there seemed to be something unsaid, a shadow lingering beneath Margaret's smile, subtle and unreadable. The room remained filled with laughter and cheerful toasts, yet somewhere in the air, like a faint echo, there hovered the feeling of something unresolved, a quiet, open ending waiting to be revealed. Sophia sat beside Alexander, a radiant smile gracing her lips as she looked around the room, a place she could now call home. Alexander's hand enveloped hers, his gentle squeeze a silent reassurance she belonged here. Across from them, Margaret sat quietly, her sharp gaze drifting toward Sophia and lingering there for a long moment. Slowly, her hand moved to her chest, resting over the fabric, where a small, glimmering pendant lay hidden beneath her clothes. Her eyes darkened briefly, lost in some distant memory, but she quickly masked it with a tender smile. Margaret's internal monologue whispered,
Perhaps it's time for another secret to be revealed, but not tonight.
The room filled with warmth as laughter rang out once more, the faint clink of wine glasses punctuating the air in celebration of this extraordinary Christmas Eve. Beyond the window, snowflakes drifted gently, shimmering under the golden glow of the mansion's lights, a picture-perfect scene of joy and serenity. And yet, somewhere within this tranquil space, a lingering question remained, an unspoken truth waiting to be unearthed, promising to open a new chapter filled with unexpected revelations. The living room was bathed in a warm, golden glow, the fire in the hearth crackling softly, its steady pops and hisses blending with the joyous laughter ringing around the tea table. Sophia rested her head on Alexander's shoulder, her gentle gaze fixed on the flickering candles adorning the Christmas tree. The warmth of his presence enveloped her like a shield, offering her peace after so many storms. Outside the window, snow continued to fall, delicate white flakes gathering on the glass panes. But inside the mansion, the laughter and the warmth had banished the winter's cold, creating a haven untouched by the frost beyond. Firelight danced softly across the small pendant around Sophia's neck, causing it to shimmer ever so slightly, as though stirred by the flames. It stood as a quiet reminder of the past she had endured, a past she had fought to overcome, one that had finally led her to a place she could call home. Margaret sat quietly in the corner, her gaze sweeping over everyone, her smile gentle yet faint. Her fingers instinctively reached for the pendant hidden beneath her collar, the light touch betraying a secret still buried deep within. In her distant eyes, the weight of something unspoken flickered, a truth she was not yet ready to reveal. The story closed on the image of them all gathered around the hearth, their laughter and conversation filling the room like music, as the soft strains of Christmas carols echoed sweetly in the background. But even amidst the bright smiles and the crackling warmth, Margaret's gaze seemed to carry a silent message, a whisper from the shadows of the past, reminding them that some secrets still lingered, waiting to be uncovered. Outside, the snow fell steadily, blanketing the garden in pure white, a silent promise of new beginnings filled with love, but still carrying the quiet weight of words left unsaid.